So I'm speaking with composer Ilan Eshkeri, whose renowned work has attracted a spotlight to his amazing style and versatility. His acclaimed and varied filmography consists of films like Stardust, Layer Cake, Hannibal Rising, Coriolanus, Kick-Ass, Centurion, Johnny English Reborn, 47 Ronin, The Invisible Woman, and many, many more. He has two very notable recent scores with Still Alice, starring Julianne Moore, which is getting a lot of Oscar attention, and Kevin Macdonald's Black Sea coming up, starring Jude Law. Ilan, thank you so much for your time and for speaking today.
Great, thanks for having me.
So I'd love to know, kind of start off, how you fell into the music path and what specifically attracted you to film and TV composing.
Um, you know what? It was a complete accident, like like most things in life. Really, I was 19 years old, and I knew more than anything else that I wanted to be in the music business.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose there was three main reasons in my, as a 19-year-old that I thought I wanted to be in the music business. One I thought that I could that I wouldn't have to work very hard. Two, I thought I wouldn't have to work very hard and I'd earn a lot of money. And three, I thought that girls would like me.
So it's the exact opposite, pretty much.
Yeah, of course, I was wrong on all three counts. I was completely wrong. Oh, there's some weird beeping going on here. So hold on one sec. Let me just see if I can turn it off.
Okay, is it a fire alarm?
Oh, no, it stopped. Yeah,
Okay.
no, luckily it's not a fire alarm.
Perfect.
So, well, it keeps beeping. No, it's all good now. So yeah, and then to top it all off, I wanted to. I started working for a film composer for Ed Shermer,
Mm-hmm.
and by the time I realized that working for a film composer was not actually being in the music business; it was being in the film business. It was all too late. So here I am.
So it just kind of spiraled and built off itself from there.
Yeah, and and to be honest, I did, I did always love film music, and I always found it very inspiring, and I'm very glad that this is my job. Although I guess I kind of wish I'd had maybe a and traveling around the world doing that, or at least giving that a go. But it didn't happen that way for me.
So and it wasn't kind of your selected path, but were you aware of film music growing up? Were there any composers or films that really kind of spoke to you as you were kind of
Well,
younger?
yeah. I mean, of course. I mean, right? I mean, what child doesn't grow up kind of loving Star Wars and Indiana Jones and Back to the Future? I can remember my dad taking me to see that. I can remember the cinema he took me to go and see it, and I can remember how much I loved the music. So yeah, of course. And I grew up. My first instrument was violin, and so I grew up playing classical music, and that was film music was cool classical music. So I was always inspired and always interested in film music on some level. It's just the teenage version of me was into grunge and wanted to be a rock star.
But I mean, looking at your kind of filmography, one of the first things people notice is how diverse in terms of genre it is. So do you kind of have like a specific or different approaches for different genres of films? Like, for instance, did you start writing the score for Stardust the same way that you approached Still Alice, or do you kind of have the same kind of structured approach that you kind of adapt to every film?
Um, oh, that's a very good question. I don't know if I would use the word structured for anything that I do, but I think that in a sense it's the same because I think really when you're writing film music, really you're telling a story,
Mm-hmm.
and you're not just writing music. You're first and foremost you're a filmmaker and you're telling a story, and whether you're telling that story by playing a complicated part on a synthesizer, or by getting a whole orchestra just to hold one note for 10 bars. You're just, the most important thing is that is the narrative and the storytelling. And through that medium, you want to take people on a journey, and generally speaking, it's emotional narrative, and that's the journey you're taking people on, and that's the part of the film that you fulfill. And so that sort of, I guess, concept is true for whatever film you do, and then surrounding that, for me, the different styles and the different things are what's challenging and interesting about the job. The fact that one minute I find myself working with Ralph Fiennes, and I'm having to research Victorian England, and I learned so much. I spent time there's this amazing library of British folk music, and that's actually quite near me in Primrose Hill, and I've researched there on a couple of different projects, and I love studying and finding out and learning about the world, and so there's that aspect to it, and where you draw your inspirations from. And you can, I build my ideas from that, or from, if I'm writing a symphonic score, from classical things, or sometimes if I'm doing a rock and roll score, I've collaborated a lot with different rock and roll artists, and I love doing that. So I don't know. In a sense, it's all the same, but I love these different influences, right. And I try and bring them into what I'm doing. I'm sorry, that felt like a very long and rambling answer.
No, it was super.
Makes sense.
Absolutely, no. That's because there are a few composers, and you're one of them, who really do, I think, kind of touch on different areas. Some composers find a niche that they fall into, and they're like, okay, this is my thing. But you do have your voice and style. But I do love that how you grab from all these different places,
Right.
And
I love collaborating. I think that's part of it.
Right.
It's sometimes. I like this idea that you sometimes you bring a musician in to work with you, bring to the table, and you kind of riff off that with them, and that's good with ethnic musicians. It's good with rock and roll musicians, So
right.
So yeah, there's a lot to learn about music in every form and in every way.
Absolutely, and I do think collaboration is the key to it. A lot of, I don't know, if you go on the internet, a lot of purists who kind of go, oh, and they get all rambled on forums. But I think, musicians, filmmaking is a collaborative process. There's no one thing. Even the director is working with so many different people and everything. So,
of course, you're the sort of captain of the director's the captain of the film, and I'm the captain of the music department.
Right.
Yeah, it's definitely about collaboration. And then, of course, there are the scores where it's, for example, with Still Alice or with The Invisible Woman, those scores were very much just me and the director, just really focused. And there are the times when I want to do that, but even then, when working with small ensembles like The Invisible Woman, it was a violin and a cello, and on Still Alice, it was a string trio and a piano. The characters of the character of the musicians and how they play the instruments comes out so strongly, and it was, I moved the dates around on both those films so that I could get the players that I wanted, who I thought were, it was like casting actors, getting the players who I thought were appropriate for the project, and really extracting the performance that was right for the film, and that was very important as well.
And yeah, I know, I can see that because music is such a human thing. So the performer or the musician does bring certain aspects, I think, to how they play the music and how it comes out. So I think that's such an interesting process where you go, like you say, like you're casting a film, you're casting your music.
But in terms of that purist thing, it's a bit like, if you listen to classical music, then people's interpretations of Beethoven sonatas or can be so varied and so extremely different. If you think you apply that to the pure notes that a film composer writes on a piece of paper. There's interpretation in what the musicians do as well, guided by the composer. But you want to try and get the musician that you want. For me, when I write with the London orchestra that I use, I know the musicians so well. I'm like, well, I've got the trumpet player's style in my head. I know what he's going to do. And if I can't get him, I'm disappointed.
So as you know, it's like Ridley Scott, getting a movie with Russell Crowe. He works with him all the time, so you kind of know their style and all that.
Yeah, and what they're going to bring for me, to what that musician is going to bring to the notes that I've put on that piece of paper.
And speaking of the notes, I mean, when you're looking as a composer and you kind of latch onto certain aspects of a film to help you drive your music, for like what kind of pushes your music, I guess, or kind of gets the notes out of you? I mean, for instance, I would think like 47 Ronin or Ninja Assassin, you'd be looking more at the editing or the flow of the action, whereas something like Still Alice, you're focused on the character or maybe the performance of Julianne, or to pick up the emotional beats. So I mean, what are you kind of looking at to what drives the music, I guess?
Well, it's what I said before, I suppose. It's always emotional narrative, even in 47 Ronin. And, there's a lot of action in 47 Ronin, but still, musically, that's still emotional narrative,
Right.
It's like the emotion is my heart is racing, that's
Right.
that emotion, or I'm full of adrenaline and I'm powerful, and in Still Alice, the emotions, that's more difficult because the emotions are deeper and much more complex. They aren't,
Right.
In comic book movies, by which I mean things like 47 Ronin, the emotions are quite direct and quite simple, and as they should be. It's like you have the hero, you have the baddie. These things are clear, but in a film like Still Alice, then the morality is more like real life. It's not completely clear cut, and the emotions are not completely clear cut. This makes me think of a moment, something that Julianne Moore's character Alice says. She's talking to Alec Baldwin, her husband, and she says, I wish I had cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such a terrible thing to say, but then she goes on to explain why it would almost be emotionally a easier thing for her to deal with if she had cancer than if she had Alzheimer's. And even though it's a complex, emotionally and morally a complex thing to say, it really highlights the what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know, the lack of acceptance of Alzheimer's,
Right.
that there is in the world at the moment. And and it's funny that it brings me on to something else that I wanted to talk about, if you don't mind.
Oh, sure.
Which is that one of the reasons I wanted to do the film is because Alzheimer's has been strangely a part of my life creatively for quite a long time now, because I did one of my great friends is Tim Wheeler out of the band Ash, and his father died from Alzheimer's. And another good friend of mine is a director called Matt Whitecross, and his father also died around the same time from Alzheimer's. And Matt made a film called Ashes, and me and Tim did the score, and it was about a man who has Alzheimer's. And it was a very different story to Still Alice. It was a much more fanciful story about an old criminal and driving across a big kind of drive and stuff. And then Tim has just released his first solo record, which I helped him a lot on and did all the strings and brass on, and that's been part of my life for a while. And that solo record is all about Tim's experiences with his father in hospital, and then I just did the government here has done a big dementia awareness campaign, and again, me and Tim and Matt have worked on that campaign, and we recorded I Get By with a little help from my friends with a lot of different famous people, Lily Allen and Chris Martin and Ray Winston and different famous people who came along and sang the song with a woman who's the face of the campaign and suffering from dementia. So I'm being a bit long-winded, but I have all these different things in my life that have kind of come together, and it's a subject that's very close to my heart and a charity that I support. And so it really came at an interesting moment for me, this film, and it was a moment at which it was almost cathartic. I could really dig deep into these things that I'd done and come up with my own emotional response.
Right. And
within the framework of Richards and Wash's film and Julianne's performance.
Right, and I was going to actually ask you that because it is a very prevalent disease in our society that I guess doesn't have the attention or the spotlight that a lot of things have. And my grandmother had Alzheimer's, and we watched her go through that entire process before she passed away. So, but does that, looking at the character in Still Alice and the disease that she's coping with, does that affect the music at all? I know it doesn't play kind of to the psychological process of the music of what it's doing in the film, because it is kind of a breaking down of the mind. So did that affect how the notes in your music at all?
Yeah, it definitely did. There's two answers. There's a conceptual answer and an emotional answer, and I'm always wary of the conceptual stuff because ultimately music's music. If it works, it works.
Right.
But it's nice to have a starting point, to decide, am I going to paint it on a big canvas or a small canvas, or what is it going to be?
Right.
And I like this idea that there's no art without resistance from the medium, and if you're a poor artist and all you can afford is small canvases, then you make a series of small paintings and you become famous for that or something,
Right.
And so I do try to set up like some sort of a rule. I don't have to stick to it. And on Still Alice, we talked about string quartets, we talked about piano, and then I thought, actually, string quartet is almost too easy. Well, the solo instruments thing was important. Sorry, I'm jumping around, but that was important so that you could feel close and up front with the instruments, not too reverby, not too, you could feel like you were close to the performances and to the players and to the sound, the sort of quirky sound, the sound of the bow touching the string, We wanted to have all of that. But then the reason I wanted to do trio and not quartet is because trios are a notoriously difficult medium to write for. Few composers historically did it. They generally wrote string quartets. And the reason it's difficult is because, in a chord you have three notes. At its most basic, a chord is made up of three notes. And if you have your top line, your tune, and your bass line playing the same note, and then a quartet, you've got two other people to fill in the two other notes, right?
Right.
But in a trio, you don't have that. So all three players have to be playing three different notes all of the time in a trio to complete a chord, if you want a chord. And that makes it a difficult medium to write for. And I liked the challenge of that because I thought maybe sometimes I'm going to get to a place where I can't do that and there'll be a note missing. And this idea of notes being missing or it being hard to get to the note that you needed to get to me was, at least intellectually, was a reflection of the disease. And so that was one starting off point for me. And then the other one was an emotional one, which I guess is just harder to explain because, I'm not sure where that comes from. That's in a sense, the scariest bit of being a film composer. You have to imagine an emotion and then try to express that.
Right.
And for me, that's a moment, being a film composer, there's sort of two disciplines. There's the craft element where you've got a melody and you just have to knock that into being a cue that fits the scene. It's like building a chest of drawers. You could teach people how to do that. It's a craft, right?
Right.
But then there's coming up with the tune or coming up with the notes, whether it's a melody or whatever it is. And that's just pure creativity. It's impossible for me to explain where that comes from. That's the bit where I spend 3 days going, nope, I've come up with nothing. I'm going to get fired. I don't know what I'm going to do. I got lucky the other times, but this time I'm just not getting lucky. And then somehow or another, you know, and you find something. And, you know, musically they're kind of four main ideas in the film. And they go from the sort of very simple diatonic harmony, just very simple melodic stuff, to the increasingly more complicated. You know, it's almost like you start kind of in the early sort of classical period, and then as it gets more romantic, the harmony gets a bit more dysfunctional, and there's this piano piece later on in the film that I like, which is a theme, and it's kind of, the chords are quite complicated and a bit, you know, there's sort of a wrong note in it somewhere. It's a bit uncomfortable, and then there's the extreme version of that, which often plays when she's having an episode, which is meant to play her sort of internal emotion of disorientation, and that was a very technical, where you can write chords for string instruments, and they just play a note, but then they can brush the string across the bow across the other strings. And I'd pick like these sort of slightly uncomfortable notes, so they'd just be playing a note, and then they go, just with I'm showing you, and I'm not explaining for the audio interview, but they'd suddenly just brush the bow across the other notes and come back to the note that they were on just quite quickly. So it's like a spark, like the synapse is going. Wow. Or something, but in a slightly uncomfortable way. And then it was very difficult for me to demo this, because the technique that I wanted was also, I got them to just not put any pressure on the string, just literally just brush the bow across the string and just airily brush it across. And also this technique called sul pomp, where you play really close to the bridge, and it creates this sort of slightly metallic sound. And sometimes like that, or sometimes the extreme opposite of playing right on the fingerboard, which gives you this kind of whispery, soft sound. And so we experimented with these unusual things, and even when I wrote the music, as the musicians were playing it, I was like, no, it's too much, do less, or do this here. We worked on it together with the ensemble together, and just created this, I suppose, textural music that is meant to be disorientating and slightly uncomfortable, and I suppose a reflection of what's, I guess, what I imagine is going on in Alice's mind as she's suffering the more extreme effects of dementia.
Wow, that's fascinating. I can't. That's an amazing process, and I mean, just you speaking about that just kind of reminds me of why, you know, I love film music, and how it's just kind of a reflection of the human condition, and just, it's the only thing that's ever made sense to me growing up. Is like, okay, I get this, you know. So that's so fascinating.
Thank you.
But just kind of going on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you did score the upcoming Oscar-winning director Kevin Macdonald's Black Sea, which, I mean, my goodness, it looks like it was such a fun movie to work on. I love that kind of man versus man idea, with characters isolated in the unknown, in an unknown environment, away from the structures and constraints of society. So kind of what was the goal? I mean, it's a submarine thriller. They're searching for gold in an old U-boat, and these guys to start, I don't know, remind me of like John Carpenter's The Thing, but it's just like a lot of psychological things going on. Everyone wants to, you know, doesn't trust anybody. Yeah. So how was the musical approach for that film?
Well, that was it was quite tricky, because we're trying to find. He didn't want a sort of old-fashioned, normal kind of a score. He didn't want an orchestral score. And he wanted to find some unusual sounds and build an unusual sound world. And so I started looking at a lot of rhythmic stuff that I thought would, you know, I imagined what would happen if I walked around a submarine and recorded myself banging bits of metal on other bits of metal in a submarine. And I tried to build percussive tracks like that, which were a lot of the backbone of the score. There's an uncomfortableness about, you know, the British guys and the Russian guys and how they don't fit in with each other. So I wanted to write a bunch of it in 5/4, this slightly sort of jagged rhythm, and then I played a lot of really scratchy violin stuff, which is all I'm capable of doing on a violin. It's me at my best. And sometimes used pitch and time in Pro Tools to make it a bit weirder or slowed down. And then I also have this strange instrument called a stro-viol, which is it's kind of like a steampunk instrument. It's from the very late 1800s and early 1900s, and it's like, my one is just a single string one, but you can get violin and cello versions. But if you imagine, it's like a single string on a piece of wood, and it's got a metal bridge that vibrates when you, and that vibrates to a membrane, a round membrane inside the piece of wood, and then attached to that, on the side of it, is a gramophone record horn, all metal, and so it's like this metallic string sound. It's very unusual, and so I was. You should look it up online. It's called stro-viol, Stroviol.
Stro-viol. I need to look.
And you know what's really funny is that I bought it in Paris, actually, where my grandmother lives. There's a great old music shop that sells these wacky instruments. But what I love about it is it's made in Britain, but I bought it in Paris. Well, it was made in Britain years ago, and then on the side of it says concert model, and I always wonder what like the home model was. But I used that a lot to make some kind of weird, kind of unusual, metallic-y, stringy sounds, and then we did also do some string motors, and some. For the more sort of epic submarine moments, I did like a sort of small string section, and then I did like a giant brass section, and so I did them separately. Like together, it would have never worked. So you could have these big epic brass chords, and then as the movie goes along, it becomes and it becomes a little more emotional. Especially to the end, it needed to just be slightly less of this unusual stuff I'm talking about, and a bit more emotional. And the other thing I did as well is I used this thing called the octatonic scale, which is whole tone, semitone, whole tone, semitone. And I used that for when they were underwater a lot to just create this sort of disorientation and this sort of weird, uncomfortable harmony. So it was a lot about being uncomfortable and disorientation and uncomfortable harmony and stuff. So yeah, it was fun to work with Kevin. I'd wanted to work with him, and it had never really worked, but it was great to finally do a project together. And also Jude Law, I love Jude Law in it. I love this new sort of more rugged action hero thing that he's doing nowadays.
Oh yeah, this what was the movie that he was in? I think Rolf Kent.
Dom Hemingway.
Yeah, Dom Hemingway. Rolf Kent did.
He was brilliant in that, and this is, I think, continuing this new direction, and I think that's just really brilliant that he's doing that, and it was a real pleasure to be able to write music for his character. He really brought that character to life in a very sort of down to earth, real, and dark way, you know.
No, it definitely seems like my type of film, so I think it comes out in January.
Yeah, it actually opens today in the UK, but January.
Yeah, January over here, so I definitely want to check that out. But I mean, we've discussed so much, but to wrap up everything, I always like to ask composers this one question, not really related to anything we talked about, but if you could score any film ever made, pretending the original score never existed, pretending the original composer never touched the film, what film would you choose?
Oh, that is a good question. But you know what's so hard about that question is that any film that I would choose, I already love the score of so much.
You got to pretend like it never existed.
That's okay, I think it might have to be Sinbad.
Wow, that's awesome. No one's ever said that.
Really? Oh, I love that movie. That's, as a child, that's like up there with me for Empire Strikes Back and yeah, or maybe Jason and the Argonauts.
Yeah, all that kind of
That with
swashbuckling.
the famous skeletons, you know,
Yes.
that would be amazing. In fact, I'm changing from Sinbad. I'm Jason and the Argonauts.
Okay, perfect answer. But Ilan, thank you so much for your time today and for speaking. This is one of the most awesome discussions that I've had. So you
Oh,
definitely
brilliant! All right,
very
it's a total pleasure. Great, thanks for taking the time.